Hi folks. Today we're going to talk about Robert Frost's poem about work, about life and death on the farm in the age of industrialization. Another Frost classic. Out, out. Out, out. The buzzsaw snarled and rattled in the yard and made dust and dropped stove-length sticks of wood, sweet-scented stuff when the breeze drew across it. And from there, those that lifted eyes could count 5 mountain ranges far into Vermont. And the saw snarled and rattled as it ran light or had to bear a load. And nothing happened. Day was all but done. Call it a day, I wish they might have said, to please the boy by giving him the half hour that a boy counts so much when saved from work. His sister stood beside them in her apron to tell them, "Supper!" At the word, the saw, as if to prove saws knew what supper meant, leaped out at the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. He must have given the hand, however it was. Neither refused the meeting. But the hand. The boy's first outcry was a rueful laugh as he swung toward them, holding up the hand, half in appeal but half to keep the life from spilling. Then the boy saw all, since he was old enough to know. Big boy doing a man's work, though a child at heart. He saw all spoiled. Don't let them cut my hand off, the doctor when he comes. Don't let him, sister. So, but the hand was gone already. The doctor put him in the dark of ether. He lay and puffed his lips out with his breath. And then the watcher at his pulse took fright. No one believed. They listened at his heart. Little, less, nothing, and that ended it. No more to build on there. And they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs. Okay. Start at the beginning and work our way through. Out, out, in quotation marks. Obviously it's from something. And probably some of you recognize it as being from one of the most famous speeches in Shakespeare. Macbeth, immediately upon finding about the death of Lady Macbeth and shortly before his own death, famous speech. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow. A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage. And then is heard no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So with that allusion, that reference to something most people would recognize as being about the, dare I say, insignificance, the smallness of life, is where Frost puts our mind before he even takes us into the story here. And I've chosen a spot today, an old buzzsaw sitting in a field up here in Fabiano's field in Canaan. So you know what a buzzsaw is. It's a big, dangerous piece of equipment used for many, 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 many decades to cut wood. And it snarled and rattled in the yard, sweet-scented stuff. Of course, one thing you don't want to do when operating a buzzsaw is to look away. You don't want to notice the 5 mountain ranges, one behind the other. At the very end of the day was all but done, was when the boy mostly cut off his hand. And if you've ever talked to anyone who has lost, hopefully at most a digit from a saw, they'll all tell you, it was the last piece of wood I was cutting that day. That's the most dangerous piece. That's when someone's mind has moved on to what's next. And notice the buzzsaw is the figure in the poem with the most character. The people are almost zombie-like the way they go about their business. In some ways, this poem might be a criticism of the coming age of the machine. The sister says, beside them is the boy and the saw. Frost refers to them both with the pronoun them, to tell them supper. And he says the saw leapt, but the boy must have given the hand. And that fateful line, the boy saw all. It's one of those moments where something horrific happens and you can just see in a split second the consequences through the ages. The consequences for the boy, he might lose his hand at best. At worst, he dies. The consequences for a family farm in Vermont when the boy dies. The tradition would be the parents grow old. The sister generally marries off to another farm. The boy marries a nice neighborhood girl, moves into the farm, takes care of the parents. The cycle continues, but with the boy gone or without a hand. He was old enough to know, big boy doing a man's work on a farm, you go to work as soon as possible. You can carry a stick of wood, you carry a stick of wood. The doctor put him in the dark of ether an anesthetic, an old-fashioned anesthetic. Some of you might recall reading the Curious George book, one of my favorites, where Curious George gets into ether and gets stoned for most of the book. And the boy lay and puffed out his breath, the watcher, an old word for someone keeping the pulse, watching for death. Little, less, nothing. There's no comfort in this poem. Frost was inspired to write it by a true story of a boy who lost his hand and his life in a buzzsaw accident in Vermont. I think what Frost is doing is conveying the essence of something on farm life and life in general. This close connection between life and death. Death can come at any moment, even when you're doing something repetitive. Maybe most when you're doing something repetitive, operating a buzzsaw. But life is brief. Like Shakespeare wrote, it's a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. But I do encourage you again to reject that message in the Shakespeare quote. Life is not just a tale told by an idiot. There is meaning to it. And we have to be careful with it. And we have to be careful not to let machines take over. The machine is given more life in this poem than the people. And of course, this is a poem written 104 years ago, but machines are of course still with us. Most of us carry a small rectangular one in our pockets, in our hands, in front of our eyes, many, many hours a day. And it might not chop off our hand, but it might cut off other things in our life. And sometimes our phones seem to have more character and more power over us than we have over ourselves. Think about that. Think about the buzzsaw. Think about the fragility of life. Again, maybe we're back to think and pay attention to what's in front of you, the saw.